morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We've got so much today. It's two great guests. Before we're done, it's the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. We recorded that with Jake yesterday. You'll hear that today. His Detroit Lions team actually plays tonight against Green Bay, so a little bit of a different schedule for Jake. He was kind enough to make some room for us here, and so we'll play that for you today. We recorded it yesterday afternoon. Live on the show today, Terrence Edwards. Terrence, obviously helping send a player to Georgia, at least training him up in the person of C.J. Wiley, so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about everything that Georgia needs to do against Texas in the SEC championship. Of course, we got to get to National Signing Day here a little bit, at least one of those stories. I probably, though, if I'm being totally honest, won't get to that until a little bit later on the show. And the reason why is because yesterday we did a lot of recruiting, which means I feel like we probably kind of need to get back a little bit to what's going to happen on Saturday with Texas. This is, after all, one of those busy weeks where there's kind of a lot going on. There is one big reason that I think that Georgia could be set up for more success against Texas on Saturday, perhaps than it had the first time around, which could be a good thing if you're hoping to see the Dogs win for the second time this year against these Longhorns. We'll talk about that. We'll use some of the words of Carson Beck to sort of help us do it. I thought there was a really intriguing contrast between the way in which Beck talked about his season and the way in which Kirby Smart talked about Carson Beck's season here this week. We're going to have some interesting, I guess, investigations on some of this, and we're going to talk about why Beck may be set up for some real success on Saturday in Atlanta against the Longhorns and exactly what it might take to win this game. We're about to throw a lot of stuff at you here, but I think you're going to like it. So let's get it started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is one thing about Georgia quarterback Carson Beck that I think is really underappreciated. And when you get a chance to experience it, I don't think you can help but be attracted to it. And I think that if you go into a game like Saturday where the stakes are so high for Georgia, and you're kind of looking for any reason as a Georgia fan you can kind of hang your hat on for why Georgia can win against Texas again, and maybe if you're kind of looking for a reason why, hey, maybe Georgia's even better set up this time than it was the time before, well, I would say that Carson Beck is one of the topics that you would probably center in on, because we would say that against Texas the first time around, Carson Beck did not really have his best game. And I would say that in the moments since then, it's almost kind of interesting that Georgia has probably not played as well against almost anybody, with the exception, obviously, of Tennessee, since the Texas game. But Beck at times has played far better. And that whole story there of, well, some games for Beck have been good, and some games for Beck have probably not been what they want him to be. And for Georgia itself, some of these moments in games have kind of made Georgia look like the sort of world beater we've come to expect UGA to be. And other times this year, that's not exactly what Georgia has been. I mean, doesn't that sort of feel like just sort of the sum total of the whole season for Georgia, where someone like me who loves talking about this kind of stuff and genuinely enjoys the chance to talk about it with all of you, we come in here on a Monday after a game, we try to make sense of what we just saw, we go towards the end of the week trying to predict what will happen, sometimes with more success than others, but it's just been one of those deals where the same Georgia team doesn't really quite seem like it's shown up for all four quarters within the same game very frequently. And the parts of various games have just been so different along the ways, it's sort of hard to make sense of exactly what this year has been for Georgia. And I think there's an overall feeling, albeit against the toughest schedule that certainly Georgia's ever played and among the toughest schedules that anyone's ever played, there's this overall feeling that maybe at times this year Georgia hasn't quite been what we've hoped they would be. If we're being completely candid, maybe that's what we might say. Which brings us back to Carson Beck here for a moment, too, because when Beck spoke to reporters earlier this week about his role in the game on Saturday and his reflection on the season, I thought that Beck was just so refreshingly honest. And I don't know about you, but to me, there's a confidence gain by honesty. Like, I try to be as honest with my kids as I can be, for instance, right? I try to, in a way that they'll understand, just be as honest with them as I can because I want them to be confident in me. And if I say something that they can very easily prove is not true shortly after I say it, then, boy, what does that make them think about me? So, to me, honesty and confidence sort of always goes hand in hand. And as a Georgia fan, you want to be confident in your quarterback. You want to believe he's the guy that can lead your team to the promised land in a game like the one it's about to play on Saturday. And so maybe if you're still trying to find that confidence with Carson, which is perhaps to a degree understandable, if you're still trying to find that confidence with Carson, let's use his own words for a minute here to perhaps boost that confidence for you, because I want you to listen to how honest he is here for a moment. Because one of the questions he was asked, y'all remember back in January, this seems like 12 years ago. It's only been 12 months ago. But back in January, we were in Miami for the Orange Bowl. Beck is coming back. He talked about sort of the unfinished business aspect of the motivation for why he wanted to come back. Georgia had fallen short of the national championship, had missed the college football playoff. Beck was hungry for some of that kind of success. That was one of the reasons he wanted to return. And here we are now at the doorstep where the things that Georgia didn't do a year ago, maybe it can do now. So, Carson, what do you think about all of that? And this is where I think some really honest moments from Carson really begin. This is fascinating. It's definitely worth hearing. Carson Beck from earlier this week.
Yeah, I think this year hasn't been easy. It's been challenging. It's been more difficult than in years past, at least since I've been here, as far as, the road to, how we got here, right? It hasn't been all butterflies and rainbows, win every game by 50, 40. No, like every game is posed a challenge. And we've had to fight consistently week in and week out. And, our schedule wasn't easy this year, and we knew that's how it was going to be. But like you said, here we are in this position with everything that we want in front of us. And I know the guys are excited. I'm excited. And even though it hasn't gone exactly how we wanted to, we're exactly where we want to be. So, no, we're just really excited for this opportunity and, the rest of the season, looking forward.
I mean, isn't that just real? Like, and doesn't it sound good to hear somebody just sort of keep it real? I mean, doesn't that sound good and refreshing? It's like, this season's been hard. It's been hard. And, listen, now we're to this moment, and now we got a chance to sort of finish the way we want to. But prior to this, there have been some moments in which this has just, kind of been a little bit hard. I like that from Carson Beck, and it leads me to believe that Beck could be on his way to having a pretty big game on Saturday because he is playing better as of late, and perhaps mentally, emotionally, he's in the right place too. And just for fun for a second, let's do this. And listen, I'm not trying to stir the pot. I don't think that Kirby's lying. I don't think that Beck's trying to show him up. I don't think either guy's doing something wrong. But just for fun, I want to contrast something here for a minute. I want you to listen to what I think is just the absolute base level honesty of Beck compared to the more measured response sometimes from Kirby Smart, because you can sometimes notice, and we said this before, that Kirby has a way of sort of not throwing his players on the bus and sort of painting everything in the most positive light possible with his press conference remarks about his players. Now, in practice, he's screaming and yelling and doing all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the public face of the organization, sometimes he's a little bit more careful about his words. And I don't know that you always get the same degree of candor from Kirby Smart as you do from a player, especially a player like Carson Beck, who is at times, I would say, almost honest to a fault. So let's do something just for fun here, just for a minute. Let's start with this. As I said a moment ago, I believe that it's objectively true that Carson Beck has been a better player since the game against Texas. And the Beck we've seen sort of since then is a far different, and I would say an improved version, especially after, let's say after Florida, right? The Texas game, the Florida game, since then, I would say that Carson has been overall much better. But if you listen to Kirby Smart talk about that, he doesn't necessarily feel that way. He sort of seems like it's been the same Beck all season long. This is what Kirby said earlier this week.
I don't really know how to answer that. I mean, I don't know how I've seen that because he hasn't. You know what I mean? Like, Carson's very consistent in his thought process, his makeup, his process. you have to judge whether he's consistent on the field, because I think he has been. I think people judge it on stats. They don't judge it on what we see, the day in, day out, process-oriented of what he's going through and what he's doing for the offense has been very consistent.
So once again, I'm not mad at Kirby. I don't think Kirby's lying. I just think that Kirby feels like in a press conference like that, he's got a job to do. And he thinks his job is to sort of not play into any storyline or narrative that somebody might be wanting to try to cast around the game. So his thought is, I think that Carson Beck has been confident and playing well throughout the entirety of the season. But once again, the very honest version of Carson, and sometimes go to the player themselves, they'll tell you the absolute truth. While Kirby says, I think that Beck's been fine all year. Carson Beck was more than happy to own it and say, you know what, I didn't play well against Texas, but maybe I have been playing better since then. Here's a very honest Carson Beck one more time.
Yeah, I think you go back and you watch that game, and there's just some situations where maybe I was trying to force the ball when it didn't need to, and maybe trying to make plays when they weren't there. And I think that's one thing that I've really improved on as, we've gotten into this kind of later half of the season, is not trying to do too much and just playing within myself and playing within the offense, knowing when to try to make a play and knowing when to just chalk it up and, move on to the next one. There's 3 downs to get a first down for a reason. You don't have to try to get it all in one play. And, I think I've done a better job at that in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I just think that's really honest from Carson. Not to say that Kirby's lying, but there's a degree of candor that Carson's providing about his own play that I don't know that Kirby did with his comments. Same thing as well about one of the other things. It's like, okay, well, where throughout most of this season has Carson Beck perhaps been at his best? And I think this is a testament to Carson's, overall mental fortitude, mental toughness, things like that. Beck has really led Georgia on some pretty significant comebacks this year. You can maybe say, well, I wish Georgia didn't need so many comebacks. Perhaps that's the case. But Beck, I think, has been really good in late-game situations for Georgia thus far this year. Once again, to hear Kirby Smart tell that, he doesn't really think that there's all that much of a difference between Beck's late-game heroics and his performance for most of the entirety of the game. Once again, Kirby Smart from this week.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that because I don't separate it. I mean, the stats do, but the stats lie. Stats are for guys that look at stats. I just look at what he does on the whole. Does he make the right decision? Does he make the right read? And that's not separated by halves or quarters. I just think the process he goes about to do it is. And you can make a case that we have not started fast and well. Is that Carson Beck's fault? I can't sit here and say that's Carson Beck's fault. I can say that Carson Beck is responsible, just like every quarterback is, for things. But there's other things that affect that, and they're outside of his control. And I think Carson Beck does a good job preparing for games. I certainly think throughout his high school career, going back to the playoff run he made at Mandarin when he led them to a state championship, which I think was his junior year, he played well in those games, and he's played well at the finish and end of our games as well. So, I mean, he's a clutch guy. He's a competitor guy, but I'm not questioning his ability to play in the first half just because of sheer numbers.
So, once again, just for fun here, this is not anything controversial. There's nothing wrong with any of this. Kirby's doing his job as a head coach. Beck, though, perhaps a little bit more comfortable just sort of calling it as he sees it, with the idea that, hey, you know what? No matter what the reason is that Georgia's kind of found itself in some tough spots in the second half, at least Carson Beck has sort of played like the kind of guy with ice in his veins, the sort of clutch gene, to use an overused cliche in sports. And that has been, for whatever reason, the sort of best moments for Beck this year. And a little bit of a different contrast to what Kirby Smart said. Carson earlier this week did sort of own that. Here is Carson.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when you get to the fourth quarter and you're down, and you got to have it, you make it happen. I think in pressure moments and pressure situations, I've been in those my entire life, and it really doesn't feel like pressure. That's what I love to do. So when those moments do come, it's either you do it or you don't. And as a team and as an offense, we've really excelled in those moments. And, you try not to get into those moments, but we have been in those moments this year, and we've been able to execute when we get there.
So, yeah, I think that's great from Carson. And Kirby says a moment ago that, stats are for those who look at stats, and he doesn't necessarily like stats. So I guess much to his chagrin, let me give you a couple of stats for a moment. It is objectively true, just measurably accurate, that Carson has been a different quarterback as of late. Go back to the Texas game. That day against the Longhorns, he didn't throw a touchdown pass. But since then, he's thrown 13 touchdown passes. Had the interception issues against Florida, we understand that, but he also threw a couple of touchdowns that day. And since that Texas game where he did not throw a touchdown pass, he has thrown 13 touchdown passes. I bet a lot of people don't realize this. Many of you do because you're kind of above average, but a lot of people probably don't realize this. Did you know that Carson Beck now leads the SEC in touchdowns thrown on the season? Now, some of that's because he had 5 against Tech, but that's also part of the late game heroics that Georgia had to have to even win a game like that. So that's one of the reasons why the late game stuff is going to be celebrated, because of the fact that Beck was at his best when Georgia's back was to the wall. And that's part of the reason why, coupled with the mental approach he seems to be taking this week, that I think that Carson could be really set up well for a much better performance in the rematch against Texas. And if you're looking for a way in which Georgia's sort of better overall, the growth of Carson Beck since kind of where he was at the midpoint of the season, that may be a pretty good example of that. Now, let me make one slightly different point, although kind of in the same sort of stratosphere of this, and we're going to move on to something else. When it comes to Georgia this year and picking games, things like that, as much as it pains me to admit, because I like to be modest as I possibly can be, I've been pretty good at picking games this year. Just one of those things where it's kind of worked out okay for us here this year. There was one big thing, though, that we did get wrong earlier in the season. You may remember, while we were quite confident that Georgia was going to beat Texas, we got that right. We also spent much of the week, and if you're always with us, you'll remember this, we spent much of that week pounding it over and over and over again, how much we expected this to be kind of a high-scoring shootout, that it was going to be one of those things where both teams may score 30, and the team that had the biggest offensive performance, that was the team that's going to get the win. So ultimately, we got the pick right. Georgia did win, but the style of game, we got that completely wrong, that it was not the shootout. Georgia only allowed 15 points that day. It was the best day of the season for the Georgia defense. So that's what happened back in October. Well, this may surprise you, but believe it or not, I'm going to go back to the well again on this for Saturday. Even though I called for the shootout and didn't quite get that the first time in October, I sort of get the impression, if not quite a shootout on Saturday, I do once again think it's probably going to take points to win. So if we do believe that Carson Beck is now playing his best football of the season and playing his best in games, which the moments matter the most, late game heroics, seemingly pretty comfortable with all of that, I think that could all work out really well for Georgia here this weekend. You know, the point total for the game on Saturday is 49.5. That's the over-under. If you're a bettor, you can bet more points scored than that, less points scored than that. To me, the over, once again, seems like a pretty likely play here, even though that's obviously not how this game played out the first time they got together in October. Let me give you one thing to sort of back up why. Let's look at the recent history of the SEC championship. Now, Georgia and Texas haven't played in this spot, but Georgia's played in these games plenty in recent years. And one of the things that we see, only once in the last 6 years have there been fewer points total scored than projected to be scored on Saturday of the 49.5. Last year, neither team scored 30, but there was a combined 51 points in the game. Year before that, Georgia and LSU, 80 total points in that game. 2021, bad day for Georgia, but still 65 total points scored. Go back to 2020. You remember this game? Georgia didn't play in it. It was Florida and Alabama. There were 98 total points scored that day. That's pandemic. Nobody was playing defense, but still 98 total points. The only game to go below the projected total for Saturday was in 2019 when LSU beat up on Georgia pretty bad. That game only had 47 total points, and part of the reason why is Georgia only scored 10. Year before that, you know, kind of the thriller against Alabama in 2018, 63 combined points scored in that game. So in the recent history of the SEC championship, despite the fact the SEC typically has pretty good defenses, we usually see a lot of points scored in this game. I don't really see any reason on Saturday that once again won't be true. So what a great time then to have your quarterback playing very, very well right now. His confidence seems to be high. His candor seems to suggest that. The stat line also proves he's playing pretty well in the field. So when the Longhorns come to Atlanta on Saturday, our expectation is they see the best version of Carson Beck of this entire year and a far better version of Carson than they got the first time around. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We're glad you're with us. no matter how you get to us, video, radio, podcast. And by the way, we're getting those Spotify Wraps coming in. I love what Spotify does on that. You all are just so nice to listen to the show, but also share your enjoyment of the show and do that. I really appreciate it. That's the best Christmas gift I could ever get. You're also letting me know that after a little bit of a hiccup on the podcast for a couple of weeks, seems like that's kind of functioning the way it's supposed to again, which is always a great thing to be able to see. So we are very happy about all of that and just glad that you're with us. Our friends at Merriweather and Tharp make today's show possible. Love them. I know we'll see them on Saturday. They're almost always, Bob and his wife, actually at all the big games as it relates to Georgia. We're so thankful for that. And we're thankful for what they do for folks in our area here, too. And the holiday season, one of those times in which sometimes the strain of a marriage that you're fighting to keep, sometimes just the weight of that becomes even more difficult to bear during the holiday season. We understand that. You've tried everything you can to deal with this and handle it, but sometimes relationships are just broken beyond repair for whatever reason, and obviously you've got your own story on that if that's your case. And I truly am sorry about that. I don't take that lightly at all. But I do want you to set yourself up, as I've said before, for success in the next season of life. And so if divorce for you is unavoidable, how you handle that divorce, the decisions you make right now, you can draw a line between those decisions and your future happiness. So that means you want a strong advocate on your side working with you to help you get this done. That's what our friends at Georgia, at Merriweather and Tharp are. As I've said, they are the Georgia divorce team, your source for Georgia divorce across the state now, not just in the Atlanta area, but offices all throughout Georgia. So if you want to have the initial consultation with one of those Merriweather and Tharp attorneys and find out what they can do for you, our friends at Merriweather and Tharp are all about that. Whether you're in Atlanta or Athens or Savannah or Carrollton or Fayetteville or wherever else, all across the state, our friends at Merriweather and Tharp want to hear your story, want to provide you counsel on the next step for you. So find them online, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we are jam-packed today. It's Jake Fromm a little bit later on. Also, we haven't gotten to signing day yet. We'll talk about probably the big thing from Georgia for yesterday. We'll get to that here in a few minutes, too. There's so much happening right now. I'm going to give you a reminder in a couple of minutes, too, about our DawgNation Invasion tailgate. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today. Now, we just spent a lot of time off the top of the show saying Beck is playing at his best. Beck's confidence seemed to be pretty high. His candor in terms of how he's talking about all this, that sounds really good. That everything seems to be set up pretty well for Carson Beck right now. In the background, if you're listening on your phone or your whatever else, the thing you may be screaming at your device is, yeah, but BA, what about the drops? What about the drops? What do you do about the drops? It is certainly a fair question. Certainly a fair question. In fact, Kirby Smart this week was also asked about these drops that just don't ever seem to get better. And it's irritating for all of us. It's frustrating for the coaches. I know the players themselves are just sick about this. Nobody wants this, but it seems to be a looming concern for Georgia. And so this week, Kirby offered this as his response to, what do you do about all these drops? Here's Kirby Smart.
Well, everybody do their job beyond just receivers and catching balls. Number one way to get them to catch them is throw them more. So we got to continue to show confidence, let those guys make plays. You help the quarterback with a better run game, which that might be some communication by Carson to them, who we're working to, and some communication by the O-line. It might be reads by our backs, and our backs running the ball better and seeing the holes and reading things better. We've got young backs who sometimes they're going to hit it. They're going to go run hard, but there's more to a run game than just how hard you run. So there's a lot of things. Tight ends, making plays, which we were able to do in some of the Tennessee game. It dictated that to us, and it's not as simple as, well, we got to target this guy more. We got to target that guy more. A lot of our offense is full field reads, and it's not predicated on who the ball is going to. It's predicated on who the defense is giving the most space to. And that's probably the biggest thing, is that I think guys have played well at times around him, and he's got to play better. He knows that, and everybody on offense does. So does the defense for this game.
The one thing I really like from Kirby on that is, in the midst of talking about all the things you can do to perhaps enhance the Georgia offense around the drops, the one thing that Kirby Smart also is very steadfast in is this belief that they're not going to stop throwing it. In other words, the worst thing in the world to do if you really are concerned about drops is all of a sudden calling a game scared because You're afraid that if you try to make a big pass play, you won't make it. The truth is that Georgia might have more drops on Saturday, and it's entirely possible those drops come at the wrong time, and maybe they prevent Georgia from winning this game. That's entirely possible. Within the realm of outcomes that you could see on Saturday, that is certainly one of them. But I don't think you can call the game if you're Mike Bobo, if you're Kirby Smart, influencing that. I don't think you can call the game with fear about that. You got to go out there and let it rip on Saturday to make the kind of plays you need to make if the game really does play out the way that I suggested it will, similar to SEC championship games of the past. You got to be ready to make some plays on Saturday. And you can't live in fear of the drops, even though you can't guarantee the drops won't return. The other thing that Kirby points out, too, is that some of this isn't as simple as, well, you just got to target this guy more and perhaps some other guy less. And I would say that's certainly probably true. But along the lines of the theme that we've kind of addressed a couple of times today, which is, hey, why does Georgia maybe have reason to be better this time than it was the last time that it beat the Longhorns in Austin in October in its own stadium? We said, well, Carson Beck's playing better now. There's also something else going on with the Georgia offense right now, too. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed how much better Oscar Delp has been lately? Like, have you noticed what a valuable weapon he has become? Now, he had a big game against Texas the first time around because you'll remember when Texas had that, momentum change, the refs did what they did, the really weird review, they got turned into a short field for the Longhorns. They scored. Stadium got wild. You sort of thought Texas was on its way to having its comeback, but Georgia puts a long drive together after that to kind of give itself a chance there. Well, it was an Oscar Delp big catch. It was a 43-yard catch that set up Trevor Etienne's third touchdown that gave Georgia the kind of extended lead that it would not relinquish. That was a big moment for Delp, but he's even been better since then. And if you're looking for another offensive weapon that you might utilize even more Saturday than you did the first time they played, maybe Delp is an example of that. Carson Beck talked about Oscar earlier this week.
Yeah, I think that situation and Oscar, he's just been given opportunities. He's had the opportunities to make the plays where, as opposed to maybe earlier in the season, he really didn't have those opportunities or the defense didn't present the opportunities, right? But no, that's all. Oscar's always been Oscar. He's always been a really talented tight end that has been able to, be explosive and make plays for us. And he showed that last year too. But, towards the second half of the season, he's been presenting those opportunities. And with those opportunities, he's made plays and he's come up huge for us. So
numbers speak for themselves here. 4 touchdowns in his last 3 games. The big game for Georgia against Tennessee, the one that probably did as much to cement Georgia's playoff status as anything that day, 4 catches, 56 yards against the Vols. So if you're looking for a guy that may be an even bigger offensive weapon on Saturday than he was the first time around, I think Oscar Delp could be that. And I do really believe it's going to take points to win this, points on both sides. I don't think that Georgia's likely to keep Texas to 15 points again. I certainly hope they do. And I'd love nothing more than to see that defensive effort replicate itself for the Dogs on Saturday. But the recent history of the SEC championship suggests, no, it's probably the plays you make on offense that are going to determine this game more so than anything else. That means Steve Sarkisian, smart coach, trying to bring out every wrinkle he possibly can, Georgia being forced to respond. So getting a guy like Delp involved, the way that he was against Tennessee and the way that he was and has been this kind of last quarter of the regular season, that could be a big thing for the Dogs on Saturday too. And that is around the Doghouse here today. Now, obviously, all of Dog Nation wanting to be at its best on Saturday. And that means not just loud inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium for those of you lucky enough to be there, but also enjoying the biggest tailgate of them all prior to that. This has become a tradition for us. We are so thankful that we cover a team and around a team that is essentially become a fixture as it relates to the SEC championship. We love all of that. We've been in every full season SEC championship since 2017. 2020 is a pandemic year. We don't really even count that. But all the other years, Georgia's kind of always been there. And that means we've always had one of these great Dog Nation invasion tailgates, such as the Road to Atlanta tailgate we're going to have on Saturday. Now, why do we call it Road to Atlanta? Because the postseason run for Georgia begins in Atlanta on Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and we believe it could also conclude there with the national championship much later in January. So celebrate all of that with us by being a part of our Road to Atlanta event on Saturday, our Dog Nation Invasion tailgate. In fact, go to DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. That's DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. It's powered by our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips, the same folks that we went to Austin with, and obviously other great events thus far this season. This is going to be an incredible tailgate, just steps away from Mercedes-Benz Stadium, all inclusive with the food, the beverage. It's going to be an awesome experience. We want you to be there with us and be a part of it. It's DawgNation.com/tailgate. It's a Dawg Nation tradition. Getting ready for the SEC Championship. Can't wait to see you on Saturday as we do all of that. All right, I believe we're still waiting for Terrence Edwards. Is that right? All right, so Terrence may be predisposed here, so why don't we do this? We are going to have a great conversation with Jake Fromm coming up in a little bit. That should be really interesting. Jake has a lot to say about what Georgia can do on Saturday, but also what Texas might try to do to be better offensively than it was the last time. If we catch up with Terrence, we'll try to do that. Terrence may have had something come up here. Sometimes that kind of goes down, so we'll see about that. But for now, we haven't really done a lot of signing day stuff yet, so why don't we do a little bit of that as a part of what we like to call Cruise Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and then we'll see what happens after that. Jake Fromm for sure, maybe Terrence Edwards here too, but let's roll on right now.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So before we're done today for our Golden Shoe, we've got another great Royal Caribbean-themed Golden Shoe to give out. And I do love, this kind of transition to the new year because I start thinking about, okay, when this year am I going to get a chance to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation? I know, at least for our DawgNation cruise, I'm angling to try to get another one of those going on too. And as I mentioned earlier this week, I also love when all of you think about me when you think about these great Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. And I will tell you, if you take advantage of like a brand new ship, such as, like, say, Utopia of the Seas, that's the ship we're sailing on for our DawgNation cruise. One of the things you'll love is brand new bar and restaurant lounge concepts they bring to this ship. Like the Pesky Parrot, that's a brand new kind of bar concept in the Royal Promenade, unlike anything a Royal Caribbean cruise ship's ever had before. They're just always pushing the limit with creative ways for folks to get together and enjoy great beverages, beautiful views, good times, great live music. That is what a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is all about. So I want you to give our friend Jessica Slater a call. Now, when I mention Jessica, understand this. Jessica does not work for Royal Caribbean. She works with Royal Caribbean. She's a travel agent. But a wonderful travel advisor, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean because they know a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation made even better when you use a terrific travel agent to help you plan that. And that's what Jessica is. She plans all my personal travel. She helps us out with our DawgNation cruise, and she'll do a great job for you. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you ready to go for everything you need for a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here as we roll towards 2025. So for the purposes of this segment, I want to kind of stay focused on Georgia and its recruiting just for a moment. And I want to kind of focus specifically on like the one big thing that sort of came out from yesterday, sort of recapping signing day for Georgia. Pretty much everything that you expected to happen did happen. In other words, all the guys that you thought you were going to keep, you did keep them minus the one that we'll get to in a moment. So for the most part, it was a fairly quiet day for Georgia overall. You woke up thinking, well, maybe there's a faint chance at a Laganza Hayward. Obviously, that was kind of already turning away from Georgia. Maybe like a Tavian Wallace, the linebacker who stuck with Arkansas. That didn't quite materialize. I think the big one that folks had some hope for was Kevin Wynn, the Greene County defensive lineman. I like his body type, big guy, run-stopping type guy. He sticks with Florida State. That was one you didn't quite get. And then in the absence of losing out on Wynn, you kind of pivot towards Jeremiah McLeod there in Lee County. McLeod also sticks with Florida. So I think for some Georgia fans, and we said this, we joked about this on one of our shows, they all kind of run together, that Georgia fans have kind of come to sort of want the bragging rights of having the top class throughout the entire cycle. They like going to the websites and seeing the rankings and seeing all the recruits, kind of the hay in the barn, but they also want the signing day surprise. I think yesterday, Georgia didn't quite get the signing day surprise. Now, that doesn't make the class any less, impressive than it already was. It just means that Georgia fans yesterday did not quite get the fireworks they're hoping for. The big one's still out there, of course, on Friday when the five-star defensive lineman Justice Terry gets ready to make his announcement. But I think for some Georgia fans, there was this hope that, maybe Georgia pulls the surprise ad, Pickett the defensive back or Wynn the defensive lineman. But all of that not quite really materializing for Georgia yesterday. But in addition to that, there was also the moment in which Ousmane Kromah, who had been committed to Georgia now for a little while, the outstanding running back from Lee County, when he made his choice last minute to go to Florida State instead of Georgia, that sort of ends up being one of those that, boy, kind of a little bit of a punch in the gut for Georgia fans. It just kind of was a little bit of a disappointment there. Here's what I'm going to tell you about that. By the way, we will get Terrence Edwards here coming up in just a second. Here's my overall take on this. And this is going to sound a little bit like I'm kind of saying, well, that's okay, we didn't want him anyway, which is not what I'm saying. And as a way of making sure you know that's not what I'm saying, let me be honest about this. I think there's a case to be made that Georgia could have recruited Kromah during this process differently than it did. It seems like a lot of steps along the way, Georgia was a little step slow on Kromah. You know, he was an awesome and very productive player, almost from the word go in his freshman season. Seems like Georgia was a little slow to maybe even extend its initial offer to Ousmane, and at times it just sort of seemed like there were other programs that were a lot more aggressive in Kromah's recruitment than Georgia was. You can make a case that Georgia should have been more aggressive throughout the process when it comes to Kromah, and if it had a better, more long-standing relationship with Ousmane, maybe the decision yesterday works a little bit different than it does. You can certainly make the case of that. But be that as it may, in the heat of the moment there, we obviously had the kind of late drama where, you know, the video from Ousmane yesterday seemed to show him just signing a blank sheet of paper, that whatever he signed was just ceremonial and the real paperwork was not received by Florida State. And so therefore, kind of like old school signing day drama, you sort of wondered, ooh, is there a chance that you know, that maybe Georgia can get back in this? And I'll say even for me, there's that hope as a fan of Georgia does whatever it takes, you know, do whatever it takes to get this guy, because we have obviously seen the film. We like this as a player. But the honest truth is, in the NIL age in which we live right now, and the fact that, just like your parents used to tell you, money does not grow on trees, in all situations, in every instance, you cannot do whatever it takes to win these recruiting battles, because money you spend somewhere is money you don't have to spend elsewhere. And I think that Ousmane Kromah is a really good player. I really do. And I think he has a chance to have an outstanding career. And the truth is, to the extent that he's not competing against Georgia, I'll probably root for him because I've enjoyed watching him play. I just like Georgia high school football players, and Ousmane's been a really good one now for 4 years. But there has to be some consideration for where your funds are allocated. And making wise decisions about that is just sort of the name of the game in this world in which we live. So Georgia did not get its man yesterday, but the money it perhaps would have spent on Kromah, maybe they can still find a way to make that and put that to good use. So we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Of course, speaking of signing day, always happy to have a guy who has factored so prominently in that now for a number of years as a high school coach, as a personal coach to great players, former great recruit himself. It's Terrence Edwards here today joining us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And Terrence, we were just talking about one that kind of got away from Georgia yesterday, but another one that Georgia fans were very happy to have. That's a protege of yours, the outstanding wide receiver C.J. Wiley. Now, you also had Travis Smith yesterday, who goes to Tennessee. And I will tell you, even though Travis is not, going to end up at Georgia, we had a chance to see him in person this year. I think he makes contested catches so well. I think he's a really good player, really fun player to watch. Just let me personally say to you, congratulations on a couple of guys that you've known for a long time, that you've worked closely with yesterday, who made big decisions and big announcements to continue their playing future in college. I know that's going to be a very special day for you.
It is. I think these guys, come to me in the hopes of being able to continue their athletic and academic career at an institution like Tennessee and Georgia. And I met both of those young men at an early age and helped them shape their career, not just me, but a lot of other people as well. So I'm excited for those guys because they had a goal in mind and they actually reached that goal, being able to sign a football scholarship at those two great institutions.
Of course, your guys didn't have a ton of drama around their stuff yesterday, but we sort of live in a time now where it seems like some of the real negotiating for some of these players doesn't start until the very end because it's just sort of easier to win a negotiation. It's kind of like, people do the eBay sniping where they kind of go through at the very end, try to make a big offer and win an eBay bid or something like that. It just sort of seems like in some cases the real work for a player almost doesn't begin until like the 11th hour in some situations. Maybe an example of that yesterday for Georgia with Ousmane Kromah ends up going to Florida State. we certainly live in interesting times, don't we, in terms of just, thinking a guy's done, thinking it's over with, but obviously the big offer comes in late in some cases. And if you're the player, it becomes very difficult to say no to some of that.
Right. I am on record saying that, I'm happy for all these players and their families to be able to earn a nice living coming out of high school and being able to secure some of these opportunities that these schools are giving them. But then on the other hand, it's like the recruitment game is not the same recruitment game when I came out, and that was 25 years ago. We really and truly, got courted by a school and went to the school because of the school for one, the coaches for two, and not other reasons to be swayed us to maybe choose a school at the 11th hour. But I'm happy for whoever gets the opportunity to get life-changing money, if that's true, because I know a lot of athletes who actually, need this type of money to for their families as well. So I don't have a problem with that. We just now, the name of the game has changed, and we have to adapt to the times. I know that old school guys that just think this is the craziest thing. I do too, to a certain extent, but I'm happy for these guys because I've been through this times, and I can tell you this: I love Georgia through and through. But if someone came with an opportunity for that type of money, I don't know where I would have landed either. And if you truly ask someone that, and they tell you that they wouldn't take the money, I think they'd be lying. I think all of us at 18, 19 years old would take the money and go to the institution that offers us that type of money.
Yeah, there is certainly an amount, and it may be a different amount for different people, but there is certainly an amount that nobody's saying no to, right? It's like, if I offer you, what's in my wallet right now, you're probably not making a different decision. But if I offer you everything in my bank account, then maybe at that point in time, maybe you are making a different decision. That there is a line for everybody, and it may be different for different people, but there's a line for everybody where at that point in time it becomes very difficult to say no to.
Right. So, it's publicly known that the recruitment for the quarterback that committed to and signed with Michigan was an LSU commit for the longest. And if someone comes to you and offer you that type of money, it's going to be hard for you to say no. I'm be, if CJ came to me and said, Coach, they offered me this type of money. As much as I love Georgia, like CJ, what's important to you first? If this is important to you, you got to do what's important to you. And that is a lot of money to say no to. And I don't begrudge any young athlete or family who takes the opportunity to take that money, because as a football player, we have to get the most money sooner than later, because our shelf life for our athletic careers is very short. So we have to get as much money as soon as possible, because football is such a contact sport. You never know when that last catch or that last play is going to come.
Well, and let me put on the other side here for a moment too, because this is where I think things get really tricky, and I don't think anybody has properly explained all this. I don't think yet, because it's all so new. So if you're the organization, if you're the program in this case, it's easy to want to get into your ego, and when somebody swoops in, they want to try to take your guy. You're going to say, we got to up the ante because we got to have this player because we want this player. But the truth is, you want all these guys because they're all good players. But in a world in which everybody, even like the richest schools, Michigan or Texas or whoever else, everybody's got a finite amount of money. Now, it may be a lot of money, but there is still a limit on everyone's ability to spend. And Georgia's probably got about as much money as anybody does, but there is still a limit on Georgia's ability to spend. At some point in time, I think the wise thing to do is to say, for player X, if he's offered whatever amount of money, if I give this guy that money for a player who, maybe limited his ability to contribute right away, or maybe plays a position that's perhaps less valuable than other positions are, if I give this much money to that guy, that just means I've got less money to give to this other situation over here. And almost like the way in which NFL GMs are constantly making these very tough decisions like this, we may get to a decision, to a point where in the college world, some of that stuff is just sort of spoken about more openly of, you've got to make some sort of harsh decisions sometimes about who is and who isn't truly worth the amount of money that's being thrown around.
Oh, most definitely. That's with any business that you run. There's always a bottom line, a number that you won't go over. You see on Hard Knocks how the Giants played out with Saquon Barkley. There was a number that they wouldn't go over, and that they said no, and he went to the Eagles. So it's the same thing that going to happen in college football. There's always a number that you're not going to go for said player because you have to manage the rest of the roster. So if player A goes above and beyond what you want to spend, that means players B won't have opportunity to get the number. So now you have to go with your second or third option at a position that you want your first option at. So there's always a back and forth and negotiation, and in all negotiation, both sides got to feel like they come out the winner. And sometimes, like in the Michigan situation, that $10 million is probably just a little bit more than LSU wanted to spend for the quarterback.
No, that's exactly right. It seems like Brian Kelly's pretty frustrated about some of this right now based on some of his recent comments. Let me shift gears to the SEC championship here for a moment. I think it's a fascinating rematch for Georgia. It was obviously its best game of the season in totality against Texas, given the opponent, given the spot where it was played. And I sort of get the impression that this rematch may play out a little bit differently. I do expect Texas to play better. I think both teams, as I mentioned earlier, are probably going to score some points here. And, it's probably a very good time to have Carson Beck playing his best football, seems that he might be. And it's a really good time to find whatever playmakers you have to perhaps put out there, because I just sort of feel like this game may be played at a pace that's fairly similar to a lot of the recent SEC championships. How do you see this game against Texas, this rematch, if you will? How do you see that playing out on Saturday?
Well, I think both teams are playing their best right now. I think Carson is definitely playing his best football right now, and hopefully that continues this week. And familiarity with each other, they're very familiar. We just played Texas a couple weeks ago. I think the guys are very confident in their ability against Texas. But we all know Shark is a really good offensive coach. So it's going to come down to who execute the best, like most of the games, and who can create turnovers and who can make the most plays, the most explosive plays. So it's going to come down to, I think, a high-scoring game, and it comes down to who makes the least amount of mistakes. And hopefully that's, on the Georgia Bulldogs. But it's going to be a fantastic game. I'm going to be there firsthand to see it, and I can't wait. And I'm excited to see the Dogs play at the Benz again.
And let's remind folks why you are going to be there. We celebrated this obviously when the announcement came out, but you'll be honored as an SEC legend on Saturday. Terrence, I'm so happy about that. So excited for you on that. What a cool thing. And when that came out, I was thrilled. Certainly a well-deserving honor. That's got to be a great feeling, right?
Yes. I've known for a while before they announced it. Josh Brooks gave me the call a few months ago, so I've known about it. But I was very excited when he told me. I think this is one of the awards that I've really wanted. Truth be told, I want to be labeled as an SEC legend because I think I earned the right to be that. So I'm excited about this. My high school teammate, Takeo Spikes, is in as well. So that's two kids from Washington County from the same high school football team. That's an SEC legend. So I'm excited for myself, I'm excited for my hometown, Washington County. I'm excited for Takeo because now he's not the only Washington County Golden Hawk that's in the SEC list.
No, I think that's awesome. I can't wait for that ceremony. I think it's going to be really cool to see you and all the other SEC legends who'll be honored there this weekend, including a couple of guys. We talked about this at the time, but you got guys like Barry Switzer and I don't even know what. It's like, listen, obviously they're legends for their own program, but I don't quite know that quite rise the level of being an SEC legend, but I reckon we'll welcome him in now. We have no choice now that they are in the SEC, I don't guess.
Yeah, right. I'm excited to meet Vince and Coach Switzer. I've watched them play and admired them from afar, so get opportunity to share the same stage with those guys is going to be awesome. You can feel a certain way about those guys never playing or coaching in the SEC, but I'm excited to be in the same and share the same floor as those two awesome people.
All right, getting back to the game itself, we'll finish with this. I'm always appreciative of your time, of course. When you talk about being at your best for this game against, Texas, obviously one of the things that comes up is, against Tech this past Friday, once again, issues with drops. It's sort of plagued Georgia all year long. Kirby says they're going to just keep right on going and still throw the ball and still try to make these connections and, still try to make the kinds of passing plays they need to win a game like this. Terrence, I know that word drops probably gives you the hives as much as anything else in the world does because as a coach, that's what you're obviously looking to coach out of folks. What do you do about that short term here going into Saturday where, if it happens at the wrong time, it could really be an issue for UGA? And obviously, given how prevalent it's been all year long, you certainly can't guarantee that it won't show up again.
Right. And it's a big issue because you have to make the plays that comes to you when your number is called and we're counting on you to make that play. You have to make that play, but just not alone with the drops. We got to tackle better as well. I know people is fixated on the drops, but we also got to tackle better. We got to establish the line of scrimmage better. Tech ran the ball on us, and we have to play better overall. It's just not the drops. I just think the team concept is more important than the drops. Overall, as a team, offense, decent, special teams, we have to win all three phases. Yes, we need to catch the football, but we need to tackle better as well.
Well, Terrence, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. Congratulations on your status as an SEC legend. We can't wait to see that celebrated inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium on Saturday. What a thrill that's going to be. Also, we're kind of coming in on that winter time of the year, bubble work. Terrence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy, because even the legend has to get back to work, right? It's like you get the pats in the back, you get the accolades, but even after that, the grind continues, getting this next generation of pass catchers ready to go, right? How can folks find the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy?
Yeah, so that is about to start. I actually just text Ron Veal, who's the quarterback coach, with me about it. So we're about to start up, and I just tweeted this morning. The DB we just signed late last night, Daniel from Hillgrove. Yeah. He's also been a part of the DB portion of the bubble work. And I've seen that young man up close and personal for 2 years. So I'm excited for him. And he's earned this opportunity to build Georgia Bulldogs. So, there's opportunity for a lot of people. So if you're looking for quarterback, receiver, DB work, and the bubble work, you can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, enjoy the weekend. Well-deserved honor for you. Hopefully it's also a part of a Georgia victory here, too, and we'll look forward to speaking to you very soon back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp as well.
Thank you.
Good stuff there from Terrence Edwards. You love all of that. And as Terrence mentioned, if you may have missed this late last night, I'm telling you right now, college football has done some dumb stuff in the past. But there is nothing dumber than signing period, SEC championship, and then the start of the transfer portal next week, all being within like the same 7-day period. Like, there is nothing dumber than this. Georgia did add a late addition to its 2025 class last night. I didn't see this till I woke up this morning. Perhaps you missed this too. Daniel, I believe it's Okonkwo is how you say his last name, Okonkwo. He did go to Hillgrove High School. That's a really good program. He was committed to Northern Illinois. I guess Georgia had their eye on him for a little while. And so Okonkwo did join the Georgia 2025 class late last night out of a very good Hillgrove program in Powder Springs. And so Terrence gives a little bit of a shout out there. That is really good stuff. So Terrence, one of two great guests we have on the show today. Kind of just to transition here, we'll get to the next guest here right now. I had a chance to record this yesterday afternoon. Now, I will tell you this. We were at the studio set up for like different shows, so I'm not sitting in the normal desk. This is obviously not the way the DawgNation Daily typically looks. But I did want to catch up with Jake Fromm. Jake and his Lions teammates play tonight against the Packers on Thursday Night Football. So Jake was kind enough to make some space for us at a little bit different time than he normally joins us. So we recorded this yesterday, a lot more in the SEC Championship. Jake's own memories of his signing day past in the midst of this kind of early signing period as it is ongoing. So this is fun with Jake. It's our Kroger Fresh Take. Let's talk to him right now here on DawgNation Daily. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for our Kroger Fresh Take as we welcome in the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. It's weird for me because I'm sitting different than I normally do. We were using the studio for something a little bit different here, so it's almost like we're doing like 60 Minutes or something. I feel like it's just a whole different environment. But either way, Jake, I'm always happy to have you as a part of our show. And obviously, we're in the midst this week of the early signing period. The recruiting process, the calendar, totally different than it was back when you signed with Georgia for the class of 2017. But I always enjoy kind of looking back on this for you. Seems like you have fond memories of your recruiting time, and obviously that 2017 class for Georgia became a special one. Do you ever think back on that? You know, it probably doesn't even really feel like recruiting time to you because you're busy, doing what you're doing in the NFL. But when you look back on it, what are your memories of the moment when you made it official and signed with Georgia?
Hey, Brandon, always good to be here on the show with you. We were actually talking about this in the quarterback room today. about how many different signing days they have now, with all the early enrolls, the NIL transfer portal, and then it just – I feel like the rules are completely different. But, man, recruiting – I can speak to what it used to be. I thought it was really cool, especially when guys kind of take ownership of the class and really start trying to bring guys along and do something special. Man, it was just a really cool time for me and Richard as well. We loved it. We enjoyed it, especially being kind of the time of the year. We had some really good fun with it and put together really a really good class. Obviously, Kirby, kind of being the guy obviously behind that. But, man, we had some great times, really fun, and got to make some really special relationships.
And you guys were the last class that only signed in February, right? After that, 2018, the next year was when the December signing period first started, and now we have early December. Can you imagine now, of course, these coaches all get paid millions of dollars, but can you imagine trying to sign your class and coach the SEC championship in the same week? And, oh, yeah, by the way, the transfer portal officially opens next week, too. Like, this is the craziest calendar college football's ever had, and it's had crazy calendars for a while, but I don't think it's ever been as wild as it is right now.
Man, it's a mess, and it's a crazy time of the year. Obviously, you just said with high school recruits, and then you got to keep the guys that you have. And this is also the kind of the time of the year where coaches start hearing about certain job opportunities and what may be opening up and guys getting fired. So, man, it's a crazy, crazy time of the year, especially for that coaching staff. And, man, and they're in charge of it all. They're in charge of their team, their players, and going and winning and coaching in a championship game. And then also, man, they're in charge of recruiting the next class and next group of guys to come in and do the same thing, where in the NFL it's totally different. And man, it's crazy, and there's a lot put on the coach's plate, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for that.
So I want to talk to you about Georgia, Texas here for a moment, and I want to be as honest about this as we can. When Georgia beat Texas in October, that was a great performance. On the road, hostile environment, and Georgia won convincingly. Like, there is nothing else to say about that. That's just an awesome, awesome display of football. But in the 5 games that Georgia's played since then, you can sort of make a case that Georgia's only played well once in those 5 games since then. That, for whatever reason, Georgia was sort of at its best against Texas and arguably not really matching that level against almost anybody else for the rest of the year. So where does that leave you for Saturday as Georgia now tries to beat the Longhorns for a second time?
Well, you want to be your best when your best is required. And we've seen that time and time again from, a Kirby Smart coach Georgia football team and this team specifically this year, going on the road to Texas and then having to respond and come back later in the year and playing Tennessee at home. So they have met that match time and time again. I expect nothing different. When they went on the road against Texas that first time, to me, they didn't even play their best game. They were kind of sloppy, turnovers. That was kind of during that bad window that Carson had there for a couple of games of just seeming to turn the ball over. But, man, he's flipped it around. He's had an incredible stretch. I think 11 touchdowns to 0 interceptions here is what this kind of run that he's been on. He's dealing right now, feeling very confident in what he's seeing, and he's out there ripping it. I mean, I think the Tennessee game was a big turning point in this team, and obviously, man, this win last week against Georgia Tech in 8 overtimes, which was absolutely incredible. I think there's a lot of momentum building with these guys, and they're a different football team than they were when they played Texas that first time, and they're a better football team than they were.
I think that's really interesting, and I sort of said this, and obviously this is wishful thinking on my part. I hope this is true, but the Tech game, even though Georgia probably had to make some mistakes to allow that game to be as sort of narrow and closely contested as it was, because Georgia was able to kind of pull it out and win it, that it has the chance to maybe become a rallying cry for these Georgia players to say, listen, I learned to trust you in this moment where our back was against the wall and one more mistake would have maybe cost us the game against our hated rival, and yet nobody made that mistake when it really mattered. You were able to pull out and get that win, that maybe this team kind of binds itself together more because of that. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think there is a huge thing that a team learns throughout the course of the season, and it sounds so simple, but it's just learning how to win, being put in these tough and unique and different situations, but not batting an eye, not cowering to what's being put in front of you, but just keep chopping, do your job, and then just find a way to scratch out these wins. I think that's kind of where this college football game has come to. There's a lot more parity now, so it seems. Man, just scratch these wins out, keep going, keep pushing. And this game coming up is no different, man. This team is resilient. It's found a way to win multiple times this season. And this is going to be a gritty challenge going into the SEC Championship playing Texas. And, man, I feel very confident in this team because they've just shown over and over when they get put in bad situations, man, they find a way to learn to win.
You've also said something that I think is important. I want to touch on this, too, that going back from the Texas game till now, I don't think there's any doubt Carson Beck's playing a better brand of football than he was playing at the time. And, look, he's still plagued by drops and all that kind of stuff. I get that. But there's a level of confidence that Beck seems to have. The decision-making process, at least to the ability of me to understand it, seems to be really sound right now. That Carson Beck just looks really in control of the situation. And so if you're a Georgia fan saying, hey, why is Georgia maybe better this time than the last time? The improved play from Beck would be one of those things you could maybe hang your hat on that, hey, maybe Texas sees an even better version of Georgia because they're getting right now, I would say, more effective play from the quarterback position than back in October.
Yeah, in the NFL, it starts with how your quarterback plays. And right now in college football, it is no different. Carson's going to be the guy to take this team wherever they want to go. It is on his shoulders, and however well he plays is how far they're going to get here in these playoffs. This SEC championship is going to be no different. Man, if Carson goes out and plays a great game, I think this could be a very big and huge win for the Georgia Bulldogs.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with the Georgia quarterback, the former one, and a guy that obviously lives on in Georgia lore for a long time. That's Jake Fromm, and of course, we're so thankful to have Kroger as a part of this conversation each and every week. And our encouragement to you as you're getting ready for the big game on Saturday, but also the really enjoyable Christmas season that comes up after that. Get stocked up on everything you need right there at your local Kroger. All the cookies that you're baking, the cakes, the pies, the ham, the sides, everything else that makes Christmas special, get that at your local Kroger. Same way for the watch party you're perhaps having on Saturday or the tailgate you're going to be having right there in the Atlanta area, all around Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Make sure you get everything you need at your local Kroger. And if you want to get the very best that Kroger has to offer, become a Kroger Boost member. That means when you sign up for the membership, you get free grocery delivery, you get twice the fuel points for every $1 you spend at your local Kroger on the things you're already buying anyway. Great incentives, gives you more time to enjoy the things you love, more money back in your pocket, all the reason why you should become a Kroger Boost member today. So find out more online. It's Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger.com/boost. All right, Jake, in the time we have left, I want to hit one more topic with you. And I've been all over this all week. And listen, I'm wrong plenty. Maybe I'll be wrong about this. But I just sort of have a sneaking suspicion that Georgia's going to see a lot more of Arch Manning this time around than it saw the first time that Georgia and Texas played, although Manning did play in that game too. How on guard would you be if you're Georgia for a whole lot more of Arch because of what he does with his legs and just because of the extra dynamic as Steve Sarkisian just tries to perhaps give Kirby Smart more to think about? How much of Arch Manning do you think we could see on Saturday?
No, I think you make a great point. Arch came in for a few kind of red zone packages there in the Texas A&M game. Quinn Ewers had a very short leash and the first time they played Georgia at home. I think you're exactly right. He could definitely show up and not just, on the ground with his legs, but throwing the ball as well. Maybe a two quarterback package could be there as well. Show something that they've never seen before. And Ewers is kind of battling a bad ankle. Look, I think you're definitely onto something. This has kind of been something in the Georgia program where, hey, if you prepare for one a quarterback and you get the other, you don't really seem to have the same success on defense. But hey, there could definitely be something there. I think it's something that he tried to maybe do the first time around and it didn't go as planned. We'll see what kind of wrinkle he has for this, but you're definitely on for something. I would not be surprised at all if Arch Manning gets 10 to 15 snaps in this football game, if not more.
Well, Jake, we always appreciate your insight. You obviously know the topic so well. We're proud of you and the great stuff that your Detroit Lions teammates are doing. That organization's red hot right now, and we love to see that. So thank you so much for being a part of all this. And, oh, yeah, by the way, how about a little flashback there to the Kroger commitments going back to the 2017 class, J.J. Holloman and Malik Herring and Richard LeCount. You guys were not just football players, but you were video stars, including Malik there doing the big backflip. Fun memories to look back on that, is it not?
Man, good times, good times. Holiday season, man, it's great. Those guys are awesome. Some of my best friends, and man, what a time. We had a good time doing it.
Richard LeCount in a Santa Claus suit is certainly a sight to behold. That is fun stuff. Jake, we appreciate your time. Enjoy the game this Saturday. We'll look forward to talking to you soon as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take right here on DawgNation Daily.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, boy, is that great or what? The throwback to the...
And here on DawgNation Daily,
for those of you who haven't seen that, so like going back way class of 2017, these are early days of DawgNation. Had a wonderful commitment video we put together. It's a big elaborate deal where it was at Jake Fromm's house, and Richard LeCount was already in the class, dressed up like Santa Claus, and the video announced that both J.J. Holloman and Malik Herring were committing to Georgia. And I believe the backstory is that Nate McBride, the linebacker from Vidalia, was supposed to be in the video as well. It's supposed to be three guys committing to Georgia at the same time: McBride, Herring, and Holloman. And Nate, I believe, was sick. Now, cool backstory has nothing to do with anything. Nate, I believe, has also spent some time on a NASCAR pit crew post-Georgia career, which is kind of a cool thing. But anyway, the video was really well done, like very cinematic. I mean, this is a very, very elaborate undertaking here. So you also had Jake Fromm in the Santa suit there. That's Holloman's house. You had Malik Herring kind of getting involved in the acting. Malik also does a big flip. And Malik's still playing in the NFL, right? I know he was. I don't always do the best job of keeping up with who's still active and who's not. But Herring had gone on to have an NFL career, so kind of a cool thing. And just a really good video. I'm sorry, Richard LeCount in the Santa suit is an awesome, awesome sight. I love everything about that. I hope that the Santa Claus that brings presents to our house, I hope it looks just like Richard LeCount. That's awesome. That is really, really funny. Very, very well done. And just a really kind of cool time. Early days of DawgNation. That was incredible stuff there. So you can actually go and see that on the DawgNation YouTube page. If you search for the Christmas Commitment, you can find that. But kind of a fun throwback to like class of 2017, early days of Kirby Smart, and really kind of a bedrock class. From that year, you ended up having, Jake becoming starting quarterback as a freshman. Andrew Thomas became a starting offensive, tackle as a freshman. And, contributing guys like DeAndre Swift and Richard LeCount and others ended up propelling Georgia to a college football playoff berth and an SEC championship in Kirby's second season. Those were fun times for sure. Let me give a couple shouts out before we get ready to go here today. First of all, our friends at Beaver Toyota. We had a great time with Beaver Toyota a couple of weeks ago, live broadcast there. We went right there on the lot to hang out with them. But the good news is when it comes time for your next vehicle, you don't have to do that. You don't have to go to the lot to make your purchase. Of course, they would love it if you do. But if you want to do this solely from the comfort of your own home in the convenient, sort of enjoyable way that is, they absolutely understand that. Your busy lifestyle, they want to kind of shape the car buying experience to sort of match all of that. So you can go to the website, beavertoyotacoming.com. You can do everything all right there from the comfort of your own home. Pick out the vehicle, pick out the style, pick out the color, pick out the sort of the things you want to go with that, the features. You can get all of that right there from the comfort of your own home. And when you make the purchase, they'll deliver it right there to you. So beavertoyotacoming.com, the place to do that today. The website, once again, beavertoyotacoming.com for more on that. Also, quick shout out to our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. I love them. They're always the home team. We are obviously getting ready to wrap up our high school football season on Friday, at least for us on the Peachtree Sports Network. And when I think about high school football, I think about folks like the Georgia Farm Bureau because their agents and their folks are kind of all over the state and communities just like yours and the one that I live in too, in the great state of Georgia every single week out of the year. So they're going to these games. They're taking their kids to youth sports. They're cheering on the Dawgs. They're just handling everything in our state much the same way you are. So when it comes time to make a decision about your auto insurance or your home insurance or anything like that, trust the folks who are right here in the great state of Georgia, just like you are. Our folks from Georgia Farm Bureau. So give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. Or online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. So golden shoe to give out here today, and I love it when folks are thinking about me when they're on a Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation or a perfect day, CocoCay, including our buddy Jose Jimenez, who sends this to me, who says he had a perfect day at CocoCay last Saturday after the Dawgs got the win over Tech. He says he watched the game at the Playmaker Sports Bar. That's on board the ship. Wonder of the Seas, what he was on. And the next morning, you go to Perfect Day Coco Cay, and so you had his ship, Wonder of the Seas, pulled right next to Allure of the Seas, which was the ship that we were on last year for our Dog Nation cruise. So nice little symmetry there on that. Jose also sharing a picture of himself there on the island with the Thrill Water Park in the background, and right there over his shoulder, if you're watching on video, that's the tallest water slide in North America right there. Over his shoulder on the great island that is Perfect Day Coco Cay. We love to see the Georgia G being showcased right there at Perfect Day Coco Cay. Very good stuff from Jose Jimenez. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Lousy stinking Gators, our Gator hater updater, 1,489 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. Don't forget, Eddie returns January 24th. But we'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. And by the way, we have our final weekly edition of Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews coming tomorrow. We'll do something for the playoffs later on. But in terms of the weekly shows that we've been airing since the season began, the last of those will be tomorrow. So we'll get ready to do that then. I'm on YouTube here, so let me do a few YouTube comments, then we'll kind of get back to the other comment sections, Facebook included, who I did not hit before the show started today. So let's see what's going on here. Darian Ford says Ole Miss should be in the playoff over Alabama. Darian, I will say that the more I think about it, I don't think the Ole Miss argument has probably been listened to as clearly as it probably should, because the things that you would give credit for Alabama for doing, beating Georgia, Ole Miss beat Georgia worse. Alabama beat South Carolina. Ole Miss beat South Carolina worse. There's a lot of things that would be a credit to Alabama that are even more of a credit perhaps to Ole Miss. Now, I think the thing that Ole Miss is being dismissed for is the teams they lost to. Losing to Kentucky, losing at Florida, losing to LSU in kind of the shootout style game. Because the South Carolina lost LSU, they can say, hey, we didn't have Lenore Sellers for that game. Whereas Ole Miss does not have much of an excuse for when it lost LSU. And so it becomes easy to make that dismissal. Lane Kiffin hinted the other day that he feels like the reason that Alabama is going to get the nod, he predicted they would, and the reason why he thinks they are getting the nod over his team is because they are, as he says, just a bigger overall brand. And obviously the committee's always facing those kinds of accusations. It'd be nice if they could, in sort of plain English, explain, this is why we think Alabama's better than Ole Miss. But obviously they're probably not going to do that. As I told you yesterday, I think from an SEC kind of homerism standpoint, putting Alabama in the playoff is the moderate position. But there's a case to be made that if we're truly looking at the 12 best teams in the country, Bama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina should all three be included. And you can leave out whoever you want to. But those, are, I would say, among the 12 best. Darian Ford on the hoodie I was wearing yesterday. I appreciate that. As I mentioned, and this is the same thing for like the cardigan that sometimes y'all like when I wear. A lot of that sort of old school stuff like that came from a company that's no longer, I don't even think, in business. And they sent me a bunch of stuff at the time, and I enjoy wearing that. But I don't even believe they're in business anymore, unfortunately. Foster Moss asked an interesting question. He says, are the stress levels down knowing that Georgia's essentially a lock for the playoff no matter what? I would say for me, no. Now, every fan can speak for themselves on this, but I would say that my stress level is pretty high for Saturday. As I mentioned the other day, there is a little bit like the flag planting thing from this weekend. There's an element of Saturday that's really not about the college football playoff. There's an element of Saturday that's sort of old school turf war of, this is not about what seed you are for the playoff, which is essentially a manufactured construct anyway. This is about a newcomer to our league, those of us who felt pride as Southeasterners in the Southeastern Conference. A newcomer is coming into our league, and they're trying to take this conference title in their first year in the league. And there's, I don't mind telling you, a lot of me that does not want that to happen. And, there's a lot of kind of emotional stake for me that almost doesn't even consider the college football playoff. I want Georgia to win the SEC over Texas. I do. I want Georgia to defend its turf. We've kind of called Atlanta our town this week. This is the capital of the SEC. Georgia's a legacy member of the SEC. I want Georgia to defend the SEC from this invading force, that is Texas. So there's a lot of that for me that's got nothing to do with the playoff. But on the playoff part of this, the other part of that is, I think that if Georgia loses on Saturday, it gives the committee every excuse it wants, and it's looking for one, but it gives the committee every excuse it wants to really throw the book at Georgia and stack the deck against Georgia. And they may put them in the playoff, but they're going to make their path to a championship very, very hard because they're going to feel justified in doing so. So the path for Georgia between the win and the loss is very, very different. I don't think the stakes are quite as extreme for Texas. Texas enters the game ranked second. If they lose, they'll drop a little bit, but they'll still probably have a fairly advantageous home game. Whereas I think for Georgia, I think you should perhaps be on guard for Georgia to be treated much more harshly. I would at least predict that as a possibility. Good questions, though. Let's see what else. Wayne Hunter says, in my opinion, we have to win to get in. Wayne, you could be right about that, but that's not what my expectation is. And if you've been a regular listener or viewer, I've been very slow to say Georgia's definitely in, Georgia's definitely in, Georgia's definitely in. When other folks have been saying that, I myself have kind of not been saying that. At this point now, though, I do believe it's probably true that Georgia is probably in the playoff. That's my belief anyway. So let me go to Facebook here for a moment because I haven't been there yet. On Facebook here for a moment. Let's see what else is going on here. George Herndon says, I sure hope our three-headed running backfield is going to be ready on Saturday. Yeah, I mean, obviously more of Rob. I think the ETN thing is still – I haven't even seen the availability report. I probably should look at that. But the other thing that's exciting when it comes to the backfield is that Cash Jones really is becoming a weapon in the passing game out of the backfield. Now, you still got to run it and get traditional running yards. You still got to do that. But I do think part of what Texas has to be preparing for Saturday is the threat that – I mean, wasn't Cash the leading receiver against Tech on Friday night? That weapon out of the backfield is a pretty big deal for Georgia right now. Matthew Goodwin asked a good question about getting the individual pennants for the 1942 and 1980 national championship. That's a really good question. They do now have, and if you're in the stadium, you'll see this, they do have official logos for the 42 and the 1980 national championships. They do have that. So I don't know that they sell that, but they do have the logos made, and if you're in the stadium, you will see those. So I don't know. I don't know if they put that on anything, but they should because the logos themselves are pretty cool, I think. I think they're really cool. I also think this, and it'd be nice if they would do this in a year they've already won a national championship to sort of give them more cover. I think eventually Georgia should claim the 1946 national championship. If I ever interview, kind of a long-form interview with Josh Brooks, I may ask him this. If Georgia should claim the 1946 national championship, which is a hot topic. Everybody's out there talking about unclaimed titles from the 40s, but I do believe that Georgia should claim the 1946 national championship. And so eventually we may get into more of that. But yeah, the 42 logo, the 80 logo, they're kind of cool and in keeping with those eras, which I think is kind of nice. Let's see what else. Craig Jones says, make Alabama play South Carolina in an SEC consolation game. It is true that the SEC championship, as much as I'm glad to be in it and obviously, want to defend the honor of the league and whatnot, the game would be better served for someone like South Carolina or Ole Miss getting to play Alabama. And really, you might make the case that the better game, because South Carolina did lose to both head-to-head, would be Ole Miss versus Alabama, where one team gets the playoff. Like, is Ole Miss Bama on Saturday a better game for the league than Texas Georgia is, given the fact that we do think both Georgia and Texas have done enough? selfishly, if you're a Georgia fan, you may say, I still want to play this game because I want to earn one of those top 4 seats. So maybe in the theoretical imaginary world we just created, it's still better for Georgia to play in the game. But if you did have the ability to sort of say, hey, we're going to use our championship game to not crown an SEC champion, but to decide a 4th playoff spot or something like that, if it really is sort of a hard cap on the 4, would perhaps be a better use of all of this. You may be right about that. Let's get a couple more here. Kent Holcomb says, if the receivers run the correct routes, don't have hands of stone, he thinks we could win big on Saturday, he says. Maybe that'll prove true. I would say that I was, I think pretty out there with my confidence for Georgia the last time it played Texas. I think this is a game that Georgia has every chance to win, and obviously our official pick is going to be that Georgia will win. But I think this is a pretty big fight here. Texas Dog reminding us about the big drop a year ago. So obviously anything could happen, I reckon. But I don't expect it to. But you could be right. Dawgs 24 talking about Miller Moss, the former USC quarterback, now being in the transfer portal, or at least, announcing his intention to go into the transfer portal. Yeah, some of that's going to be interesting. I mean, it seems like to me Georgia could go after a transfer quarterback. Obviously, I think it really likes Gunnar Stockton. But you want to have the best competition you can possibly have, which maybe means another transfer. And so a Moss, like let's say it's Jackson Arnold, guy. I'm just throwing names out. I'm not reporting anything. So I think that's an example of a couple of things. Guys like that, and Rashad is a little bit like this too. Guys like that are players that you could certainly expect to come here and compete and have a chance to win the job. But none of them have been so good that they're obvious upgrades over what Gunnar Stockton could be either. In other words, I don't foresee Georgia, if it were to bring someone in, I don't foresee Georgia bringing in the kind of player that you would say, oh, that's it, that's done. This is obviously your starting quarterback. I'm assuming that's not the case. Part of that's because I think that Gunnar has a chance to be really, really good. And part of that's because, you look at the kinds of players who have transferred recently, it's a lot of Will Howard, right? I mean, it's a lot of, pretty good. I guess he can start, but it's not obvious he's sort of changing your fortunes dramatically. That's sort of what the transfer portal is at quarterback a bit. Let's see what else. Is it Kai Roggins on YouTube? It says I can see Stockton bringing the Tebow skill set. He definitely has what I would describe, at least in high school, as a similar running style to Tebow. Now, I don't know you can run that way in college. You'll be taking a lot of big hits. But, yeah, he's definitely an athletic player. And he is very prolific passer in high school. I think some people will say, a little bit of an interesting, perhaps even unusual throwing motion. But the truth is there have been plenty of people who've had great success that have also had an unusual throwing motion. And just like Carson Beck, the version of Gunnar you'll see next year in spring, G-Day, is very, very different than the limited version of Gunnar in like small bites that you've seen him in during his first couple of years. I'm pretty high on Gunnar Stockton overall because people that I really trust like him a lot. I always sort of defer to people who know more than me on situations like this. And a lot of people who know more than me think Gunnar's pretty good. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron on me mentioning everything in my bank account. That was more of a figure of speech. I don't think that everything in my bank account is going to do much to anybody on anything. By the way, Paul Moon also mentioned Kojo Antwi, the former Lambert Longhorn and Ohio State Buckeye. He's now in the transfer portal. So there are going to be all kinds of names. And, I sort of find myself, it's almost impossible to cover all of this because there are going to be so many. But, yeah, Kojo's one of those guys. And it's almost like one of those things, too. It's like when a guy like this pops up, I will be more honest, I'll be more than happy to admit. I try to be very honest. It's like the name pops up. You're like, wait a second, who is that again? Oh, yeah, that's the guy who went to Lambert. It's just one of those deals where it's a little bit hard to – when all these names are popping up, trying to keep the proper context for all of them becomes a little hard to do. All right, let's see what else. Let me get some DawgNation.com comments. Of course, big show for us tomorrow, getting you ready for game day. I've got a great high school game tomorrow night, too. A lot of talk about Ousmane Kromah and Jeremiah McLeod. Well, guess what? Their Lee County team travels north tomorrow, coming into Milton High School there at the Eagles Nest, take on Milton, who at worst is one of the 5 best teams in the country. They may be the absolute best team in the nation this year. So, yeah, there you go. Johnny Prescott mentioning running backs who got away. There have been several that have gotten away that probably didn't change the world. You may be thinking about Tank Bigsby. I thought he was a good player at Auburn, but that may be who you're referencing. Other guys like John Emery Jr. and others. You know, sometimes when these guys get away from Georgia, they don't always go on to great success. That's certainly true. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says, this class is giving me 2018 Death Star flashbacks. Could be scary good. Yeah, I'd say the top-end talent, really, really impressive. And, look, Talon Taylor gives you something at receiver you haven't always had. The collection on the defensive line, I mean, that just has a chance to sort of get you back to what you were in the very best era of your program. I think that's really big. Top linebacker and Zane Walker. There's a lot to like. It's different because you don't have the sort of long list of offensive linemen. You really have very little in the way of defensive back. So it's a little different on that front. But, Elias Williams has a chance. He just has a chance to be something really, really fun. This is an awe-inspiring body type. An awe-inspiring body type. I think people are going to really like him. I think that Ethan Barber is really underrated. Blackshear, the receiver, seems like people haven't talked about him enough. Landon Roldan has a chance to be, I think, really good. Roldan is one of those dudes that's like legitimately a blazing speedster. So, yeah, you can start going through a lot of this and just sort of pick out your name, and there's a lot of them to do that. UGA Marine talking about Dublin Dr. Pepper. So I do know about this. I actually do know about Dublin Dr. Pepper. So I'm telling you, A, I'm a little bit of a nerd, and B, I do like Dr. Pepper a lot, so I do know about them. Although I think it's been shut down. I don't think it still exists. Savannah Bryant says there are several items on eBay with both the 42 and the 80 logo on them. He says, I got Christmas ornaments with each on the tree this year. It's a sharp logo. I think it's one of the things that I think Georgia has done a good job with. I've said this before. I don't love the current font that Georgia's using for like its stuff in the stadium and stuff like that. It's just too blocky to me for some reason. I don't love that font. It's very plain to me. But the stuff for like I guess I'm just sort of old school, I guess. Maybe that's what it is. But what they did to like celebrate the 42 championship team and the 80 championship team, like they have a really sharp design, I guess, whatever you call it, abilities. I don't love the current font they use for most of the main stuff, but yeah, the 42 and the 80 logos are really nice. Let's see what else. Some very funny stuff in here. Randy Hall also talking about some of the great high school players that come through the state of Georgia, all the famous last names for sure. David Hogue, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. UGA Marine also asking about Sarkisian as the offensive coordinator at Alabama. So he was the main play caller in 2020. And because he came in as kind of an understudy analyst when Lane Kiffin was there. And then when Shanahan left the Falcons to go to the 49ers, Sarkisian came in as the play caller in Atlanta. For the most part, they were making him run Shanahan's playbook, and wasn't really all that successful. They did win a playoff game, but it's kind of a bad era for the Falcons, although it's been much worse since then. But Sark in Alabama in 2020, I thought was just a diabolical play call. Now, that was also at a time in which nobody was playing defense, so maybe it was easier to be a good play caller in 2020. But the stuff that he was doing, especially when Waddle was healthy, with Waddle and who was the other receiver at the time? Was it Judy? Waddle? Was it Judy that was still there? The way they were running off of each other and just creating space. I mean, it was a very tough offense to deal with. Devontae Smith, excuse me. Devontae Smith, Waddle and Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith won the Heisman. Just a really, really tough offense to deal with. So I don't think there's any doubt. People kind of talk about the career rehabilitation that Nick Saban has kind of provided for some folks. I don't think there's any doubt that Steve Sarkisian came out of that time at Alabama a much better coach than he was going in. And I realize there's some other stuff that's going on there, but just keeping it between the white lines for a moment. This was kind of an okay head coach at Washington, kind of an okay head coach at USC. Nothing all that great. Just keeping it on the field here. It was just sort of what it was. Undistinguished time here in Atlanta. But on the other side of Alabama, where he helped them win a national championship in a pandemic, he's been really, really a different coach since then. And there's a lot of stuff about Texas that gets on my nerves, the University of Texas that gets on my nerves. But Sark, to his credit, from when he got there as the head coach in 2021 up until now, has really worked to make that program look more like an SEC team. Like, I really don't have much bad to say about Sarkisian. I think he's a good coach. I really do. So it sets up for a fun matchup on Saturday, to be sure. For now, we're going to go. We've got to get ready to go. So y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Obviously, plumbing emergencies, you don't want to have your weekend ruined. A lot of championship games on, the Georgia game most important of all. So make sure you're able to enjoy all of that by getting your water heater. If it goes out, reach out right away. Get it replaced the same day. That's what our friends at RS Andrews are all about. So you can find them online, rsandrews.com. They'll take good care of you. Once again, rsandrews.com. And we'll see you back tomorrow. One final big day, getting you ready for the SEC championship. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.